Anyone ever heard the name Travis Fulton? No? Well, Travis Fulton was probably the most prolific MMA fighter to ever step foot into the cage. And you never heard of him because he was the big enchilada in regional promotions. You know, big fish in a small pond kind of thing. He pretty much fought in every second-rate organization there was at the time. I'm surprised I didn't see him in bum fights, trying to knock out Rufus the Stunt Bum when that came out. Fulton, who like so many others was bullied relentlessly in his formative years, had devised a plan to off the people responsible and then take his own life. But when Fulton got into sports, his status as victim changed and life went on. Those bullies didn't know it then, but they had laid down the groundwork for the creation of the most infamous can crusher in MMA. Fulton started training in wrestling and boxing, as well as earning a second-degree black belt in American Kempo. Every time I see Kempo in action, it reminds me of that Vietnamese guy in the suit doing Nam Hyun Dao or whatever that bullshit is called. I don't know. To be honest, I don't really know much about Kempo. I know Chuck Liddell did some Kempo. Maybe you guys can enlighten me in the comments if it's any good or not. Anyway, when Fulton saw his first UFC event, it all came together. He started training in the Miletich fighting system that was created by MMA pioneer Pat Miletich. Now, I'm not going to get into too much detail when it comes to Fulton's fights for obvious reasons. It would just take too long. So was Fulton the best fighter you never heard of, or just a dime store Tank Abbott with all his teeth? Travis Fulton's MMA career started in '96 when he was 19 and lasted for 23 years. If there was one thing Fulton didn't do, that was drag his feet. The guy was busy. His official record was 320 fights, 255 wins, 54 losses, 1 no contest, and 10 draws. From 97 to 99, Fulton had 64 fights. He even holds the record for the longest sanctioned MMA bout, which was 52 minutes. And he lost, by the way. So Sakuraba and Gracie, your little 45-minute scrap, not long enough. Sorry. Initially, Travis Fulton obviously came out to fight, meaning he wasn't playing around. He had a few rocky fights at the start, but soon would hit his stride. And although a lot of his early opponents were made out of cardboard, Fulton still had some skills. I would rate Fulton as a journeyman. He had decent grappling, knowing enough to stay out of harm's way, and if given the chance, he'd probably try to submit you. He did have heavy hands and some decent combinations, but from what I saw, grappling was kind of his forte, and the thing that he relied on the most. For a period of time, Fulton fought every 6 days. At one point, he was riding a 40-fight win streak. Of course, he was fighting guys nobody ever heard of, but still, you gotta respect that output. He won tournaments in Valetudo Championship, as well as winning 2 tournaments in the IFC. He won the ISCF Super Heavyweight belt when he beat some guy named Dan Chase, who had a record of 0-9. With a win like that, you're probably thinking why Fulton didn't fight in the UFC. Well, he did, twice. At UFC 20, where he lost via submission to Pete Williams, and again at UFC 21, where he beat David Dodd. The UFC even tried to get Fulton on tough, but Fulton couldn't make weight. You guys remember John Jones' debut at UFC 87 against Andre Guzmão? Well, Fulton was asked to step in and fight when the scheduled fight was in danger of being cancelled, but declined for some reason, opening the door for John Jones. M1 Global, Rings, King of the Cage, Extreme Challenge, Cage Thug, Fulton was everywhere. He even beat Cal Worsham, the longtime nemesis of the fabled Dan Quinn, or the Angel Maitreya, as he's also called. Dan Quinn is like the secret end boss you need a cheat code to unlock.
If you fucking have the nuts to stand with QTs, fucking stand with me, motherfucker, and then I'll beat you to death, like I was planning on beating fucking Cal Worsham to death, okay, in front of thousands of people.
He was the inspiration for the Bad Boy logo, after word got around that he beat up 5 guys in a bar.
Dan Quinn knocking out 5 guys that attack him one time at Juanita's in Encinitas, California with witnesses, okay, hence the fact that the Bad Boy Club sticker is drawn after me. Ask Boogaloo the artist.
The fastest hands in the sport at age 55, the man that discovered cold fission and cured cancer, but that's a story for another video. So how did Fulton stack up against fighters that weren't 0-9? Well, he did fight a bunch of guys that had either been in the UFC or were on their way there. Guys like Dan Severn, Evan Tanner, Forrest Griffin, Andrei Arlovsky, Sergey Spivak, Jeremy Horn, Rich Franklin, Jeff Monson, Renato Babalu Sobral, and Rico Rodriguez. He did lose to all of them, but not as badly as you might think. In many of those fights, Travis kind of held his own, if nothing else, just being tough to put away. The guy was fighting every week. Paper-mache opponents or not, that experience has to count for something. He did manage to beat some names like Wesley Cabbage Carrera, Heath Herring, and Joe Riggs, showing everyone that on any given day he was dangerous. Travis Fulton's last MMA fight was a championship bout against Shannon Rich with our friends over at M1 Global. I saw bits and pieces of this fight, and from what I saw, it was two guys that were over the hill, throwing a few lackluster punches and kicks, with Fulton finally winning via some half-ass submission. On the surface, Travis Fulton appeared to be a decorated and very active fighter, someone who definitely had skills but not enough to compete at the top. He could have been a good gatekeeper in the UFC, maybe someone for young up-and-comers to test themselves on. The problem starts when you take a closer look at his record. For example, Travis fought a guy named Dylan Sherman twice and beat him both times, only a few weeks apart. Okay, so what? Well, when you check Sherman's record, he only has 2 fights, both against Fulton. Okay, maybe that was just a coincidence. Steve Fiskus, same thing, only 2 fights and lost both of them to our boy Fulton. Jeremy Armstrong had a total of 4 fights, all happening in 2003, and 3 of them were losses to Fulton. Tony Day is another one. He did have a few fights, but he fought Fulton 3 times and lost in every instance. But what stands out to me with Day is that on January 5th, Day got knocked out by Fulton, and 10 days later, on January 15th, he got knocked out again by Fulton. Bruce Nelson got knocked out by Fulton on September 23rd, and then had a rematch with Fulton the very same night and got submitted. I know it was the early 2000s, but are you going to tell me that Fulton knocked some guy out cold and then got a green light for a rematch the same night? There was no doctor around, no medic who advised against it. I know the sport was young, but I find it hard to believe nobody raised concerns about it. There were many more that Fulton fought more than once, more than twice. Fulton fought some guy named Rory Prazak 8 fucking times and won every single time. That must be a record for number of rematches. You don't need to be standing in a public toilet to smell shit. Either Fulton had an unhealthy obsession with rematches, or his record has more padding than one of those rooms in a psych ward. Then there was his fight with Johnathan Ivey. You guys remember a few years ago there was this viral video of some butterball fighting Ken Shamrock, and he did that double roll? Well, that was Ivey. In their fight, Ivey had Fulton hurt and dropped him. He then got on top and threw a few bombs, but then suddenly he just stopped and tapped out. That was after Ivey faked a heart attack or some bullshit, I don't know. In an interview Ivey did after the fight, he claimed that he tapped out of respect for Fulton. Apparently, one of Ivey's heroes was Travis Fulton. So, according to Ivey, quote, "I tapped out because my hero was getting punched in the head," end quote. Hans, Bobby, that's what you do in a fight. You punch each other in the face. Anyway, you guys can make of that what you will. Up until now, the worst thing Fulton could be accused of was dubious matchmaking with all the rematches and fighting low-level opponents. But then, in 2021, Fulton was arrested and charged with possession of child as well as exploiting a minor. If found guilty, Fulton would have faced 70 years in prison. Fulton pled not guilty to all charges, but that would matter little because a few months later, Fulton would be found dead in his jail cell. Cause of death? Suicide by hanging. According to Fulton's lawyer, he had just filed some documents a few days prior on the behalf of Fulton to change his plea to guilty. What a shit show. Travis Fulton went from being bullied to beating people up every week to dead in a jail cell. He had an impressive record. He had many records, but how much of it was even real? What I could gather from people that knew him, in the early days, Travis just came to fight. He wasn't the best, but he was tough. And when the competition got better, Fulton just wasn't willing to put in the extra hours. So he decided to fight cardboard opponents. Guys nobody ever heard of, sometimes even quote-unquote his friends, in order to rack up those wins and become known as that guy with a crazy record. I don't even think he gave a shit if people knew or not. Whatever the case, because of his criminal activities, his personal reputation is completely ruined. Please consider liking, commenting, or even subscribing if you enjoyed the video. Thanks for tuning in.